Hi, thanks for tuning in to Working Musicians. I'm Dris Organica, and today I'm going to be talking about believability. I'd also like to thank Corona, Doers, and Not Your Father's Root Beer for helping make this episode a little more enjoyable. Okay, so what do I mean by believability? That's kind of a big word that covers a lot when it comes to music. If you've ever watched any of these American Idol or The Voice or any of that kind of stuff, I think it's one of those things that really makes a big difference because they're televised. It's not just something you hear, it's something you see and hear at the same time. And so I've noticed that a lot of times what people are singing and the way they do it, their style, just really doesn't match who they are as a person, or at least as it seems from a visual perspective, right? So, I mean, just sort of an obvious thing is me being a white Protestant male, it probably wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for me to try to do R&B or rap or something like that, or cumbia. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. I don't think there's too many, white Protestant males doing cumbia or reggaeton out there. But if you were to see me in person, it'd be pretty obvious that I'm not likely to be the kind of individual who is real into rap or reggaeton, right? Yet you watch some of these shows and you see some of the things that they're trying to do, and you'll see that there are certain artists that just don't connect simply because they're just not very believable. They don't look the part. They don't sound the part. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. In a world where music and visual media are so tied together, I think it's something that we need to be thinking about as artists. It's one thing to be passionate about something, and it's another thing to be believable. So I've got a few things that I'd like to talk about as far as what it means to be believable when it comes to your own music. Okay, so one of the big things that I think every artist has to do in order to be successful is to find their own sound. You have to find your own voice in music, and that's not something that comes quickly. And it's not too hard if you go out, like let's say on Reverb Nation, and start just listening to random artists and acts, that there are some people who do a much better job of this than others. And it usually is represented by their fan count and the amount of plays that they have. Not to say that there aren't services that can help pad this or manipulate this to some extent or another for a sum of money. But if you're going to be out there and trying to really promote yourself as an artist, you need to be an artist. And to me, it's kind of hard to imagine that somebody who in the last couple years decided to pick up an instrument and start singing along to it has really found their own sound. Yet the industry really seems to thrive on younger artists, right? You don't see a whole lot of rock and rollers, on the new side of the things, that are old, right? Yet those are guys who've probably found their own sound. Now, obviously, guys like Aerosmith and these big, huge rock bands, from the 70s and late 60s and whatever, while they might be making huge sums of money at their shows because, they've been out for so long, they've just got such a huge brand name and following that they're just kind of a household name. I'm kind of like, let's not look at that so much. But I'm just talking about if you're a 45-year-old individual, it's kind of weird being out there trying to promote your music, right? Not to say there's not a lot of people who don't do it, but it's not like anybody's going to stop you. But age and relativity do play a big factor in the business. And at the same time, younger artists that have found their own sound tend to really relate and capture an audience a little bit better than some of us old farts. And that's one of those things I kind of look at because, here I'm in my 30s now, and I'm sitting here thinking, here I'm clearly, if I can dare say that I'm an artist, I've definitely, in my own opinion, found my own sound. But does it really relate to, the teenagers of this day? And does it really need to? And is my sound believable for who I am? And so I think it's really important for an artist to kind of view themselves from the outside in and really evaluate who they are as a person and do their best to make sure that the music they're producing and writing goes alongside with that. So what do I mean? Earlier today, I was listening to the radio as I was leaving a park with my wife and kids, and I heard a song from a band that, well, I don't know their catalog that well. I've heard of before, and I realized they've been out for a while, and very quickly in the song, they were talking about, times when they were 16 and all that. I'm just thinking, man, you guys are probably in your 30s now. And even if I hadn't have known that, there was just something about it that wasn't very believable to me. And here's something that's being broadcasted over the radio, right? And clearly they've probably sold some albums, but I was just listening to it as a person in their 30s thinking, this is stupid. This does not make sense to me. Like, this is crap. And I listened through it. I didn't decide to change the station. I was just trying to keep my kids happy in the back seats. And it was just like, gosh, this is garbage, absolute garbage. Everything that they were playing was just so overdone. And it just sounds like everything else in that kind of pop punk genre that they were doing. And it was just hard for me to listen to. But then I started thinking about, if I'm 16 years old and that's my thing, maybe I need to keep in mind that I was never really that punk kind of a teenager. So maybe it's just one of those things where it doesn't translate to me. And maybe, if I were one of those people, it would still make sense, even if I'm older. But the more I got to thinking about it, no, it doesn't. It doesn't make sense. And so in my mind, I'm just seeing a band that's spent a lot of money to get themselves publicized, yet I think it's pretty obvious that they have kind of a bit of a problem with disconnection between who they are as artists and who they're trying to market themselves out to. And to me, it's just kind of strange to be in a band where I'm in my 30s or 40s and I'm talking about stuff about teenagers, and teenagers are my market, while teenagers are generally the ones who are out there buying music. It's kind of hard when your focus group is just teenagers. Now, in the meantime, clearly teenagers are looking back at older music from like guys like The Doors or Pink Floyd and all that stuff and loving it. Hell, I wasn't old enough. I'm not old enough to have been out there to see the Moody Blues or really have experienced that, but I think they're great. There's a lot of older artists that I think are just fantastic, second to none, and just blow the smoke out of a lot of the stuff that comes out today, even though we've got better equipment. And, even if the recordings aren't quite as commercial sounding as what we have out today, I just prefer it. But while that doesn't make me unique, I don't think that's the norm. But like I said, I was listening to this group and it's just like, good grief. This is terrible. Absolutely terrible. I mean, the album, I'm sure that the song that came off of sounds great from an audiophile perspective, but it just doesn't make sense. And it's just like a lot of these people I'll see out on public social media, or even on things like American Idol or The Voice. It seems like the people who go the farthest are the ones who are the most believable. Not always the most talented, but the most believable, and that just really connect to us on an individual basis. And something from, I think, a season or so back, there was a young, probably 16-year-old kid named Sawyer who was really into older style folk, kind of acoustic styled music. And he was clearly not the world's most talented singer, but man, did he have a voice, and did he have an image and a persona that was just so in tune and just so believable that it was hard to not fall in love with. And I think that's what people are looking for today. They're not looking for the world's most talented musicians. They're looking for people who are the part. They're not looking for people who are actors. They're not looking for people who are trying to play the part. They're looking for people who are the message. And a guy like Sawyer, I probably need to go look on the internet and see what he's up to right now, since he won The Voice. But whatever he does, it's without a doubt in my mind, he is going to be believable, because everything he does, he makes his own, right? And here's a guy who's, mostly been doing covers on a TV show and making them his own, and just people fell in love with it. But then you got to take into consideration, he's got to start doing original music if he's going to sell himself as an artist. And I think it'll be very entertaining and interesting to see what comes up out of that. But let's look at this as into ourselves. Okay, so if you think that the first, couple songs you've ever written in your lifetime as an amateur musician are going to be good, you're completely wrong. I don't want to put words in other people's mouth, but I know I've written probably 100 songs in my lifetime, and I tell you, probably the first 30 I ever wrote were complete crap. I might have gotten lucky here and there in between then, but what I've noticed is as I've gotten older and progressed in finding my own sound, even though some of the stuff I play might be a little less technical, a little less esoteric, and a little bit less artsy-fartsy, so to speak. I used to be really, really into progressive metal, and that was my thing. Tool, I still love them to death. I mean, it's my favorite band. I'd say they kind of ruined music for me in a way. But I used to write a lot of hard rock that was, weird time signatures, weird key changes, and that was my thing. But as I've gotten older and I'm just not so angry about stupid shit anymore, it's just kind of hard for me to write music like that. I'm just not in that same headspace. So I've had to kind of redefine myself as an artist because I've redefined myself as a person. And I've noticed that in doing so, I've kind of gotten away from electric guitar driven music. I mean, one of my favorite artists right now and has been for the last several years is John Mayer. While clearly he is a superb musician, I wouldn't say he's the world's best singer. His voice annoys the hell out of a lot of people. I think it works well for what he does. But here's somebody like John Mayer, and why is it that coming from a band like Tool, who used to be my favorite in my teens and early 20s, and now that, late 20s to 30s, I've fallen in love with more acoustic music. Why is that? And how does that affect me as an artist when I'm writing music? And for me, it's pretty simple. I very seldomly play electric guitar anymore. I've been playing acoustic for probably the last 5 to 10 years predominantly. And as a result, I still use a lot of the fundamentals and the things that I've learned stylistically from my progressive metal days. That's still a huge part of who I am as a person and as an artist. But going into the acoustic realm, it's just not the same. And I've found that I've had to develop my artistry around who I am. And when I write songs now, they're not overly complicated. While some of the picking patterns may be a little bit more intricate than some people, do, I don't tend to just do simple strumming all the time. I've really developed myself into hybrid picking, and that seems to be what moves me. But how is it that we remain relevant while remaining true to ourselves? I think that's a huge problem that we have to deal with when we decide to really find our own sound, and when we decide, okay, I have found my sound, I know who I am as an artist, and it's time for me to portray this on a record and really start pushing it. So that's the big fundamental and the big hurdle you have to overcome, is the obstacle of who am I as a person and how do I translate that in my artistry. And I think once you find that, it's pretty obvious. I mean, when you start getting those butterflies in your stomach when you're playing along, you're doing something good. While we're always a little bit biased towards our own music, I think if we're really objective and really search our souls, it's not too hard to figure out if what we're doing is good or if it's crap. And when you really, really genuinely feel the music, even if a lot of other people don't appreciate it, there's going to be someone else out there who does, because they're in that same headspace that you are. So at this point, you've developed yourself as an artist. You know who you are. You've found your sound from years of playing or just real soul searching or whatever it is you have to do. Because there are people who manage to figure this stuff out in their late teens and early 20s, and that's amazing. Those are the kind of people who make it really, really big, and they're few and far between. So let's say you found your sound, you know who you are as an artist, and now it's time to start recording your album and putting yourself out there and releasing your own music. And it gets to a point where you realize there's a whole lot more to it than just recording an album and putting it out on iTunes. Okay, so have you ever heard a song on the radio or off an album, and you've never seen what this person looks like before, but you kind of have this sort of visual sort of feed that you get off based on what the music sounds like and what their voice sounds like. And then you see them in person, whether it be it on TV or whatever, and it just completely blows your mind because they don't look anything like they sound. I remember that's something I noticed a lot when I was a kid before the internet was really an up and coming thing. Because when I was in high school, high speed internet had just started to come out, and it was very expensive, and most people didn't have high speed internet. A lot of people didn't even have computers at that point. I went into college not even knowing how to type I didn't even know what Google was when I got into college. Now, clearly I had to figure it out, but people today are very computer savvy, and we have so much access to really see who people are. And we just have so much more resources available thanks to the internet, to where it's not too hard for us to follow music that we like and really see these people. And I've kind of come to notice that it's gotten to the point where music is as important visually as it is sonically. So, in my opinion, I think it is more important than ever, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, that you have to look the part just like you have to sound the part. So if I were to go out there wearing gangster rap stuff and try to sing country music, it's just so not believable. I don't even know why anybody would ever do that. I'm sure there's a few people who have managed, but it's just something that seems pretty obvious. If you're going to do country music, don't come out dressed like Master P or 50 Cent. Nobody's going to believe what you're doing. Just like nobody's going to believe me trying to do gangster rap, even if I could pull it off, sonically on an audio spectrum. The second you see me, it's just obvious. I am not a rap person. I'm not from the ghetto. It's just obvious. Not just because I'm white. Clearly, a lot of people would say Eminem's one of the better rappers that ever existed, and he's as white as snow. But you just look at him and you hear him, and his sound and his image just coincide at a level that's very, very believable. So if you're one of those people who's really developed a sound that is very, very signature unto yourself, you need to also develop an image that's also unique to yourself. And I think a lot of times people who really live and breathe their own music, and this is their life, they really go hand in hand pretty well, because when you see, the more starving artist types, they not only do they sound the part, they look the part. They're very, very believable. And that's why some of these guys on the indie scene have really managed to make it even to some level of commercial success, just because in addition to being very, very talented, they are what they say they are. They look the way they sound, and they sound the way they look. But if we're that emerging artist who has really found their sound and has really has the ability to captivate an audience, we also have to look at ourselves in the mirror and realize that, our visual presence on our MySpace or Facebook or Reverb Nation or our own personal websites needs to make sense with our own voice and our artistry. So I think it's pretty obvious to think of and look back at things where people have failed miserably at trying to convey a certain image. Like, good grief, just because you're in a rock band does not mean that you need to take a picture of yourself in front of a brick wall. It's just so cheesy. Or even better yet, do it in black and white. Be creative, but more importantly, be original. Be true to yourself. If you are a family man, you're a father of 5, and you've got a farm and children, and that's your lifestyle, and you spend half your day on a tractor, don't be afraid to incorporate that into your music, because if that's who you are and that's your sound, that's great. And that's what makes a lot of these country music artists just so believable, because they are that part. If George Strait was faking it, he would have never made it as commercially successful as he has now. I mean, he's the biggest thing in country music since, the steel guitar. And he's very, very believable because he is what he sounds, and he looks the way he sounds, and he sounds the way he looks. He's very, very believable. Now, obviously, we don't all have certain things going for us from a visual perspective. I've seen groups out there playing live who did not at all look the part, but good grief, were they awesome. Just fantastic musicians, and it really takes you by surprise. And, maybe that's something to take into consideration and be realistic of. People always like to root for the underdog. And so if they see some kind of nerdy looking computer guys who just rock the house down and are just very passionate, and it just blows you away, and how surprising how they are just not what you thought, maybe that's what you have going for you. But it's just one of those things you have to kind of take into consideration, that your style, your visual appearance, and the artistry of the visual side needs to match your audio as much as possible. And there's more to it than just, taking pictures that make sense with the kind of music you're doing. Something else to take into consideration is this. If you're trying to do Christian music, you probably need to record it in a fashion that is comparable to other Christian music, right? Not to say you have to, not to say that there's nothing wrong with trying to push the envelope and break the mold, but something that I've noticed is I'm at the risk of saying an epidemic, but is very commonfold with Christian music, is super, super clean sounds. It's like you've got grunge rock and Nirvana, and then you've got the bipolar opposite, Christian music. They just seem to use super, super clean sounds, and that's part of what it means to be, as part of a Christian group or a praise group. And I love some of this stuff. Some of it out there is great, absolutely wonderful. And despite what your religious connotations are, there is some really good Christian music out there. But I've kind of noticed that there is a very, very common theme with Christian music. Very clean sounds and very clean imagery. And that's great. So perhaps if I'm a Christian artist, you're not going to hear me, out there using very, very colored preamps like Neve and trying to really, really compress the heck out of things and make them crunchy and really pumpy or anything like that, because my sound and my image don't support that. So when it comes to recording your album, it is, I think, imperative to realize that the tonal qualities that you're trying to go for need to make sense with the type of music you're doing and the type of artist you are and how you look. So in other words, I think if you're at the point where you've developed your own sound, you've got a pretty good idea of who you are as an artist, you've got a pretty good idea of what you need to do visually to make it make sense. You also need to think about what you need to do sonically when you're recording your album, mixing, mastering, to make sure that it's not in a complete juxtaposition of where you are. So if I'm more of a DIY style musician, which is really what I am, I've noticed that even when I've gone to pro studios and use very high-end gear, I have a tendency to kind of feel the need to kind of color it up and kind of add a little grunge and some stank to it, because making super clean, overly crisp, very, very commercial kind of pop sounding sounds and sonics doesn't really fit well with my style of who I am as an artist. Even if it might sound good on a track by track basis, it really doesn't make sense in context with who I am, not just only as an artist, but as a person as well. That's kind of been my sound is, I've never been the guy who's had very expensive guitars and all that kind of stuff. I currently play a sub $500 Breedlove guitar, which, maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, but, I'm not out there trying to use Martin, $3,000 Martin guitars to make the world's crispest sounds, using super high-end gear, trying to make the cleanest possible sound I can, because it really doesn't make sense for what I'm trying to do. I'm more of a child of the 90s. My sound is more grunge than anything, even though I do a lot of acoustic stuff. It's more grunge rock inspired. So, which is kind of a pandemic of people from the 90s, especially the early 90s, if that's kind of your sound, the Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots, all that good, Soundgarden, all that good stuff, more so in the grunge rock kind of atmosphere. So that's something that I have to take into consideration even when I'm making and recording my albums, is I don't need to be going for the cleanest sounds. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean I need to be using low-end gear. Whereas if I'm going for more grunge sounds, I might be using more API or Neve style equipment versus SSL or Grace or just the really clean Millennia stuff. Not to say there's anything wrong with that gear. It's great. But for what I'm trying to do, it doesn't make sense to use that kind of thing. So I think it's a really good idea if you're going to be going to a studio, look at what they have and make sure that that engineer knows what your goal is and give them some good comparable artists that this is the kind of sound I'm going for so that they're using the right gear to record you so that it's not completely opposite of what you're trying to go for. If you're trying to go for super clean Christian acoustic music and you're using the world's most colored vintage preamps and compressors, that's great, but that's probably not what you're going for. Now, if you're on the opposite end of the spectrum and you're going for a real vintage vibe, then yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So just something to kind of keep in mind when you're going to the studio is that you need to go to a place that understands the sound you're going to, and more importantly, you need to understand so you can communicate it to the engineer. Okay, and so finally, you found yourself not only as a person but as an artist. You've got an image and a presence that matches your sound, and you've got a recording that is done in a way that is where it's recorded, mixed, and mastered in a way that it makes sense for your visual and audio perspective. Now you've got to market yourself in that way. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I do not have the answer to this or exactly the world's best advice on how to accomplish this. Because if I did, I would probably be making millions doing my own music, which is just not the case. I don't think that's who I am as a person or as an artist. But I've noticed that I've seen bands out there try to portray themselves as the biggest thing since sliced bread. And then you go look at the places they're playing. It's like Jack's local bar in Cleveland. It's like, come on, who are you trying to fool here? I think it's better to be honest and be true to yourself and to the people out there and your fans as to who you really are. Because if you don't, people are going to figure it out real quick. You don't want to have this ego about you that doesn't match your stage performance and vice versa. So, I mean, hey, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I'm a college student and this is what I do on the side and as long as it's believable, trying to portray yourself as, you're just this emerging artist, that you're just a little bit of exposure away from being the next Rage Against the Machine is complete bullshit. I mean, people see through that so fast. That's why I kind of have a problem with people spending 2 to 5 times their budget on their web presence versus their album costs. And I've seen this enough times where their website looks great, and then you look and listen to their album, it's just completely amateur. It's like, who are you trying to fool here? This does not make sense. And, something to take into consideration is, iTunes is a great option. It's very widely used, and using iTunes will make you sound more professional. And there's a lot of services that'll help get you on there. But another thing to keep in mind is, if you're a more of a touring band and you're always playing shows, it might not make sense to try to put much money or effort into getting your album out there so that you can buy it on the internet versus, screw trying to make a bunch of professionally wrapped and packaged CDs and focus that money instead on merchandise. Because, at some point, music is just the thing that helps sell who you are. And it's gotten to the point where people aren't really making money so much off their music sales and CD sales and MP3 sales. They're making it off merchandise and ticket prices going to shows and all that kind of thing. So perhaps it would be better for you to give that stuff away for free on the internet, especially if it doesn't make sense for you to drop several $1,000s on the production of the CD, and instead give away your website or promote your Reverb Nation site where people can get your music for free. Because sometimes the best advertising is, hey, what do you have on your iPod, and people trading music. It's not really any different than what it was in the past. People are constantly recommending other bands, and the easier you make it to get to your music so you can download it, that's the end game for a lot of people. It's one thing to be able to stream it, go to the website and click it, but it's another thing if you've got it on your iPod. Because if it's on your iPod or on your phone or on your computer, you're much more likely to listen to it than if it's on some CD buried, beneath a bunch of other ones. So there's definitely something to be said about, whether you charge for your music or not. I mean, it needs to make sense with who you are. Clearly, if you're a top 40 artist, you need to charge for your CD. If you're a band that tours, once or twice a week, and you really your goal is to just get exposure, it might not make as much sense to try to sell CDs because there's a lot of expense that goes into having a professionally packaged CD versus spending that money on t-shirts, bumper stickers, and just pins and tags and that kind of thing. Hell, thong underwear, whatever works. So maybe it'd be better if you just spend your money on that and sell that at your shows, and then you've got free advertising to where they can just go to your website or whatever social media and get the music for free on that and spread the word that way. So I think that not only do you need to sound the part and be believable, you need to look the part, and what you do needs to be true to who you are, but also I think that the recording needs to make sense as well. And once all those the visual, the audio, and the recording really seem to come together, at that point you need to realize how you're going to reach people and what's the most important means. Are you out there trying to make money? Because if you are, sometimes it's better to give your music away for free and to get people to those shows so that they can be there to buy your merchandise. And it's one thing to buy an MP3. That's one of those things where it's like you don't actually have a physical something that you got for your money, but $15 for a shirt, and it's something that you can wear on a weekly basis, and it has your band's name on it and their website or whatever you decide to put on the t-shirt graphically. I mean, they've basically paid to advertise you. So maybe that's a better method to go about, as opposed to worrying about how much you're going to charge for your CD and spending a whole bunch of money on making UPC codes and trying to get your CD out there, because it may not even matter. You may be better off just giving it out for free as a promotional tool to get people to your shows. So at any rate, I'll stop rambling on about this, but I had a little bit to drink, and I thought, this is something that I think people need to understand, myself included, when we're making our music and finding out who we are as artists. So thanks to everybody for listening, and I'll see y'all next time.